everyone. For this month, I got a question about how I break down my layers in Procreate, so that's the video I'm going to be doing for you. Just let me know when it's done if you have any questions. Bye. I'm going to break down all of my layers here. This is not a clean file. I did not name anything. This is just what it looks like, and I'm going to explain my process from start to finish and how I do different layers and layer masks and clipping masks, etc. Okay, so to start off, I always begin with a rough layer, which I have hidden now, but this is what it looks like. Ta-da! Usually I've drawn these like this big, actually this big, and then I just zoom it up, and that's why you can see this is actually kind of a blurry image. And that's because it was really, really tiny, and I just blew it up so that I could make the clean line over it. I also had done already a rough color so that I knew what I was going to be doing, but we'll get back to that in a minute. Okay, so I have the rough, and I put the opacity down, and I drew over it. Ta-da! There's not a huge difference generally when I go from my rough to my clean, and it's mostly just refining the shapes and just making it, literally just cleaner. I also really like leaving the rough layer there a little bit, so if that is something you enjoy doing your style, I kind of love how that looks personally, but we'll turn it off for today. But this is what that looks like to go from the rough to the clean, and the brushes that I like to use at this stage. So if we go in there, the default dry ink brush I added to the top because that's one I use a lot. I love that it has a bit of texture to it. However, I also really like some of these other ones that are in here for like a really thin, super tiny sketch, or a really thick one. Like if you're really zoomed out, you might need a thick one. So those are the brushes I usually use for that. Okay, so after I have my clean line, I start doing color, and I'll begin with a basic fill. For this one, I went with a really clean, solid fill, but oftentimes I also enjoy doing a textured fill, and the way that I do that is I use my big chalky one here, and you'll see that even if I paint over it, there's bits that just never quite get painted in, and I actually really like that it shows through because it looks almost like chalk or pastel, and it gives that texture right away, which I really love. I didn't do it for this one, but you'll see that in a lot of my paintings, that there's that texture where you can see through the painting a little bit, and that's how I do that with that brush. Now I have my super basic fill here. What I start using after this stage are clipping masks and sometimes transparent pixels, so I'll walk you through what those are. So I'll show you this. So let's say I have this fill here, and I want to be able to paint just inside the line. Okay, so I have this nice clean fill where is the area that I only want the color to go, right? So from this point on, I will use a clipping mask. To make a clipping mask, you just press a new layer, and then you click the layer, and then right there is clipping mask. The other one we're going to be using later is called an alpha lock, and I'll show you that in a second. But for today, for right this second, you're going to click clipping mask, and this little tiny arrow is going to show up to show that it's clipped. And the other way you can do that is if there's already a clipping mask here, choose a new layer, hold it down, come on, hold it down, do what I say. There you go, it gets selected, and you can drag it, and it automatically gets clipped in to these other ones here. So those are the two ways that you can make a clipping mask. Now, when I have the clipping mask turned on, I can only paint where I had painted before. It clips it to what is below. And now I have this clipping mask, and then I can erase here, and it doesn't erase what's already there. It just erases what I'm drawing on this layer, just those darker shadows. And then what I can do, since I can't create a new clipping mask just to this border that I created, but I can click it and choose alpha lock. And now I'm also painting only within this new layer that I've created. So now I can go in and I can do like splotchy bits. And again, it's only gonna clip to what's there. So that's how I use clipping masks and Alpha Lock to paint within my painting that I've already created. So now I'm going to show you how I broke this one down. So to start with, just the base color. Sometimes I'll separate even this, like the skin and the clothes, from each other, but if it's a quick project like this, I'll just leave them together and then use the clipping masks as needed. All right, so first I have the border, which I just showed you how I did. And then I'll even leave things like blush off and as a clipping mask. And I do that because I like to keep things separated. That way, if later I decide, you know what, I want to change the color of this brush, I can go into hue saturation. I can sort of play with those settings. I can change the color, make it more pink or rosy or whatever, and it doesn't impact anything else. I can also go in here and adjust the angle or anything else that I want. And because it's separated but clipped down below, so I can find it later, it makes it really easy. I can also just go in here and lower the transparency if I wanted, stuff like that. So I like to keep that separated. And then here we have, I put the lines for her hair. This is a good example of when I use that really thin sketch brush I mentioned, because then I can just go in, make it really small, and just do tiny little scratchy details like that. Okay. So basically what I'm doing is I have my flat color, but now I'm adding in those extra little bits of detail. Like I said, I like to keep those all separated just so I can go in and change them more easily. Now we're gonna go ahead and do the shadows. So this is where I had painted the shadow. Oh, I think I also had this pearl layer on that was above everything. All right, so this is what that shadow layer looks like. You can see I did it right here under the pearls. This is the color I painted it with when it was on normal, but then I can take this layer and I can choose darken or multiply or any of these other ones, and it'll affect how that layer appears. And this one I ended up choosing darken and lowering the opacity a little bit. The reason why I did that is because if you look at another area, so that usually when I do this on multiply, because you can see that multiply will make this area extra darker than this area, which is more similar to how shadows actually work. And actually, I think that's how I should have done this layer instead of darken. So that is just a little bit too dark. So I'm going to lower the opacity a little more. And there you go. So now these areas that are already dark are just a little bit darker than the other ones. And that's why I often use that. It's just a really quick way to simulate light and shadow. Then I'll do a different color, but similar process there for the skin tone. This is actually the exact same skin tone color, but just set to multiply with the opacity down. And then for highlights, I do a very similar process, but then I just do a different layer mode. So here we have, it's a really bright sort of peach color, and I put it on soft light and lower the opacity, and we have a little bit of highlight. And then I went in and I gave her a nice little extra bright little nose highlight just for fun. And then I did an extra pass of light for her face because I felt like there needed to be a little bit more contrast. So same thing here. I'll show you what it originally looks like. That is it at normal, and this is it on the soft light setting with the opacity turned down. Okay, and then I like to do at the top of this what I call like my magic lighting, which is when I will put a layer, put this on normal so you can see what it looks like. It's just purple, but then I've sort of painted the corner and maybe some of the edges and went to Gaussian blur, which is right here, and blurred it out and then set it to multiply. So this just adds a little bit of dark over into this corner. And then I do a similar thing over here, but with brighter lights. And then I set that to, I did this one to, I often use soft light, but then this one I did hard light because I liked how vibrant it was. So I often just play with those layer modes and choose which one looks good. And then I did a similar thing here for the pearls, a little shadow on the edges so that it can pop out. And then I also often, it didn't really necessarily matter for this illustration because everything was already really red toned. But let's say if there was an ocean, I would want to change the color of the line so that it was less brown. Maybe I want it to be more blue or green. But I'll often use these clipping masks, and you can see here on the hand, it changes a little when I turn on the clipping mask where I colored the lines there. But I always go back and I make the eyes extra dark because I really want those to pop and have more contrast. And I do think it makes a difference when we look from far away. It helps make the eyes more of a focal point. But for example, I think maybe the mouth got a little bit too much of a dark line there, so I could always go in and make it a lighter color so it doesn't pop as much if I wanted. All right, so that's how I break down my layers. Oh, sorry, wait, one more thing. The very last thing I do on top of everything is a textured layer. I have on my shop the textures I use. This was just a photo I took of some cement. I try to make sure that it's fairly even in value. So like this is all the same amount of gray except for some splotchy bits, because how dark this is will impact your layers beneath it. So I take this and I change it to overlay usually, and then I just lower the opacity. And now we have a little bit of that speckle, which is some extra texture at the very end. And we did it. Let's see, where's her name? Ta-da!